Well, I finally left French Polynesia after being there for 4 months, and I set off for the next country in the South Pacific, which was going to be the Cook Islands. Now, the Cook Islands are about 500 miles away, and so I started out. The seas were around 4 feet or 4 meters when I left, and so it was quite windy. I think it was averaging about 25 knots up to 30. And so it was kind of an exhilarating passage. The people ask me how I can sail by myself. Well, you see this silver thing on the back. That's the wind vane, which helps to steer the boat when I'm not there at the wheel. So I can like set it, and it will keep the same course for a while. So the seas finally went down a little bit, and I was getting closer and closer to the Cook Islands. It took about 4 days to get there for the 515 miles. I was a little bit apprehensive because I knew that the harbor at Aitutaki was very shallow. It's only about 5.5 feet deep, and my boat is 5.5 feet deep. I finally got inside. It was really nice. It's a very calm harbor. I put 2 anchors out, one off the bow and one off the stern, and it was very protected. The lagoon itself is very shallow, so it has a central high island and then a very shallow lagoon and a fringing reef all around it with islands, like a ring of islands, almost like an atoll. So I stayed there. I was the only boat there for a long time. Actually, the whole time I was there 7 months. There were a couple people when I first got there, but they left. So it was very active in the harbor, lots of children playing. They also brought supplies in. And Aitutaki, that's the name of the island, was supplied by boat from various places, usually New Zealand, because it was a former New Zealand colony. So they would barge things in. They couldn't come in because it was too shallow. So you can see the ship offshore there. And the barge would come in. In this case, it had propane, but they also brought all their supplies had to come in this way. So it was a very busy place in the port there. So always had things to look at. There's a lot of activity. But I tried to get around the atoll as much as I could. There were activities. Canoe racing is very popular there. There was also like a sailing club there and a restaurant. Nice place to relax. There's my boat, and as I said, I was the only boat there, so I was the only sailor. I met this guy. His name is Tawny. He's half Cook Islander, and one day he asked me if I could take him and his family over to one of the islands called Honeymoon Island. Very beautiful sandy island. So we all got into my dinghy, and because it's so shallow you can't really take a bigger boat, but my dinghy was fine. We got over there, walked around. Of course, there's nobody living on this island. They call them motus. So we walked around and just had a nice day. I also went kite surfing there on another trip. I also met Tawny's uncle, Richard Story, who was head of the fisheries department. He had a boat, and he also did fishing, so he would take me out to go fishing. Usually we'd leave in the morning. Sometimes we'd go all the way around Aitutaki in the lagoon. And in this particular trip, we caught a couple of fish, a couple of mahi-mahi. And so that was a nice thing to do. So I talked, and I knew Richard pretty well, and one day he asked me if I wanted to stay in his house. He came from a fairly influential family in Aitutaki, so I moved into his house, and he gave me this little cat, which is really sweet. Her name was Shadow, and here she's inside the house, but she was always trying to get inside, but I really didn't let her in very much. She really enjoyed it because I would go spearfishing a lot, and every time I went spearfishing, she got some of the leftovers. So I would go up my kayak, and of course Shadow would follow me out, and then she'd be waiting for me when I came back in. And she usually got some fish. She was being a supermodel there. But she always just kind of hung around the kayak because she knew that's where I would spend a lot of time. And I would cook the fish up inside. This is a parrotfish and I think a snapper. And so this is the view from the backyard. It was really nice. One day I speared this fish. It's a type of a grouper, and it's a little bit large as far as its size range. It's pretty large. And I actually gave some of this to Shadow to see, because I was told that if a cat won't eat it, the fish is not good, because there's something called ciguatera that happens there. So Shadow ate it, but the next day she wouldn't eat it. But by that time I had already eaten quite a bit, and I got ciguatera, and it wasn't very nice. It was your body gets all numb, you can't feel your fingers and toes, and it really knocks you out for about 2 weeks. You have no energy, but eventually I got over that. There were a lot of activities. Rugby is really big in Aitutaki because they're a New Zealand colony. They were. So sometimes you would go down to the square by the church. And there's a very old church, and they would have games going on. And you would just they had magnificent sunsets there. I think maybe because of the lagoon, it was so large and it reflected the clouds very well. Now, a big thing in Aitutaki and all over French Polynesia is dance. And so people would get together for any kind of occasion. So those dance sessions were a lot of fun, but it began to get time that I had to leave Aitutaki. The weather was turning good again, so I set off for the island and country of Tonga. And this is going to be a long trip. It's about a 7-day trip. And the weather was pretty good. Again, I would average about 150 miles a day, average about 6 knots. Occasionally it would get up to 9 knots when I went down a wave face, but generally I averaged right around 6 knots, so that was pretty good. And I've been really looking forward to going to Tonga. It's a very important place in Polynesia. So as I entered, I first saw this site of land, and I went into the mouth of the harbor. Beautiful harbor, kind of like a fjord. And the first thing to do is to check into customs. And what you do when you enter another country, you've got to present your passport and you get a visa to stay there. And then sometimes you have to renew that. You have to pay, of course, but it's not too much. So I set off to do a little sightseeing the first couple of days, and it was really obvious that Tonga was going to be a beautiful place to stay. And I ended up staying there for, I guess, about another 7 months. I was in Aitutaki for 7 months, and I stayed in Tonga for 7 months. So the next video is going to be about Tonga. So hopefully you like this, and please share and subscribe.